Hi, I'm Will Bruin, and I was just recognized as a Seattle Sounders legend. Now I get to do voice reads for the Sounder at Heart podcast network.
Here we go. Come on! Hey, Oshan! Let's go!
The Seattle Sounders have done it! MLS Cup winners! The Sounders rule the region! Seattle Sounders is campeón! All creatures great and small.
Rothrock going to collect it. He does just about. Runs into the advertising awning. Low to our left. Ball goes in. Oh, what a cross! And what a goal!
Where's my copy?
I got a bunch of them in the car. I'll get you some.
You're handing them out for free already.
How many
cost on them?
$50.
I'll Venmo you.
This episode of Nos Arietes is sponsored by Full Pull Wines, a Seattle-based wine retailer and proud sponsor of Nos Arietes since 2011. Full Pull was founded in 2009, is based in Seattle, and is owned and operated by longtime Sounders supporters. They offer the best boutique wines of the world to members of their mailing list, with special focus on their home, the Pacific Northwest. Welcome back to another episode of Nos Arietes on the Sounder at Heart Podcast Network. I am joined once again by my good buddy, the host of Soccerwise, David Gass. How's it going?
Great. I'm ready to chop it up. I'm jealous of the jerseys in your background, and I'm ready to talk.
Oh yeah, we got some Patrick Ianni stuff here. That's an a signed Obed Vargas jersey.
I was going to ask what the stripes were.
Yeah, that's I think that's who that is. Yeah,
I would assume.
Obed Vargas, and then I think this is a DeAndre Yedlin jersey from Tottenham.
Nice.
Yeah.
Man, weird that Yedlin's on RSL. It's just like a weird spin back around. I made a strong take about it that I think he's a defender of the year contender if he plays up to his level because of the way RSL plays, but it hasn't been a terrible take so far, but it hasn't been great.
You know, and it is funny because it was 2014, his last season in Seattle.
Wild.
I would imagine some of our listeners, they don't even remember that.
He was the shining light of Americans in Europe for like 2-3 years. He was the only one consistently playing on his team around that 2018 dark days.
And you know what else was funny is I really thought he was going to get to 100 caps for the U.S. national team. And I think he's going to end up falling just a little bit short because I guess this is what sort of happens with a lot of national teamers is they are regulars and it seems like they could just, they're just going to keep ticking off 8 to 12 caps a year forever. And then they just stop getting called in and they do 0.
Yeah, he's got 81 caps, which is a ton and is an incredible national team career. But he was, as a young player, definitely well on the way to hitting that. I think he really got hurt by the fact his generation basically is the lost generation. That's not his fault. So he got hurt by the fact that after they wanted Berhalter to jump to the next generation because we hadn't qualified anyway, and let's get there. And he was in a little bit off and on, but then when he came back to MLS, he just completely fell off the map.
Yeah. It's too bad. And, I would like to think that he will someday have another, like a farewell stint, but it's getting, we're getting to the point now where the axes are not going to quite maybe line up where he's the right price and the right need. And if he were to come back at this point, it would almost be purely as a sort of like a 1-year swan song kind of situation, which is.
So he's in a 4-way tie for 28th all time on the appearances. Cause 81 again is a lot. Tim Ream's on 80.
Yeah.
So he will probably pass him. Weston McKennie's on 64. That's like the next. Pulisic's already ahead of him. But if he got one more, he would jump over Tab Ramos, Thomas Dooley, and Desmond Armstrong, who are 3 like legends. And he would go into a tie with Eddie Lewis, Eddie Pope, and Brad Friedel. So yeah, it does show Yeah, it shows the level he was on. I mean, he was starting at Newcastle and at a time when, again, people weren't playing. And then when he came back to MLS, it's interesting. It's just MLS is so specific the way you have to structure a roster. And so guys like that just like are never going to be probably paid the number they want. And now you get into a comfort versus challenge situation. And I think some of the national team coaches have tried to like overly sense that of like, oh, well, he's come back for his family to be comfortable. Like he's not pushing his competition anymore. And it's like they give up on those guys before actually getting them in the pool and being like, oh, he actually can't hang at this level anymore.
Yeah, it is interesting. And while we're on this subject, and since we, part of the fun of this show is that we're just kind of talking MLS here, but, one of the players who just came on the market, Daryl Dike, a little bit of a flash in that, he is a few people in our market have mentioned, hey, that might be an interesting player. I did not completely appreciate that it was 4 years ago that he left Orlando City. And that he has, because he went when he first went, his first two stints on loan and then his first real stint in England were both really good. But he has spent most of the last 3 years injured, and now he just got released by West Brom. Where do you put? He's still only 26, I believe. Where do you put Daryl Dike in terms of, is he someone that MLS teams should be targeting to bring back?
So I think Seattle probably sits in a unique place here in which, if you could get him on a non-DP number, you wouldn't be reliant on him, and therefore you could risk the injuries concerns for him, because that stuff's not going to go away. Like he's
been
sidelined most of the last 2 years. Yeah. But he's a game changer when he's on the field, and he would be, when healthy, he would be a top 5-10 goal scorer in Major League Soccer. So that's like the risk you would have to take, where for Seattle, with Musovski and De Rosario and whatever, you could take that risk if you wanted to. I'd be surprised if there were a lot of other MLS teams who could, because I don't think they have the cap flexibility to do it. And I'm trying to think of like a team. The only teams I could see give him a DP spot are like a Colorado, where they are like, this is our lane and we're not going to get other people. And we've fully established that this is what we do. And so we'll be the ones, right? The amount of money they gave Paxton Aronson, no one else in MLS is doing that. So I think that's like a type of team that I could see maybe talk themselves into it. And the other piece is, with no transfer fee, you could up, if you don't need the DP spot because you're not going to use it on someone else, you could push him into that number, which is like max TAM number between 1.2 and 1.8, whatever it is. And if you needed to, you could buy him down. If it's a 3-year deal, then let's say it doesn't work out. Once you're a year and a half in, you could look at a buyout or a termination or something. But I think in the list of teams that are like competitive in MLS, I think most of them I wouldn't say are worth that risk.
Yeah. And I mean, one thing I thought was interesting is that he wasn't quite making DP wages in England, but I don't know what his mindset is. Like he might, I don't know, maybe someone who feels like he would need to be a DP to come back to MLS. But it's an interesting, this is going to be a very interesting summer. And not just because it's a World Cup summer, but because there's this long pause between games. Yeah. There's almost 60 days between games, right?
Yeah.
And do you think that essentially that will change the market as well? Or is it more of just and I don't know, this is like I don't think we've ever had a summer like this, have we, where we've had this long of a pause?
No, absolutely not. I think 2014, there was 2022 obviously didn't matter because it was a Winter World Cup.
Right.
2014, I remember like an extended pause where I don't think it was as long for 2018.
No, I think it was like 3 weeks or something.
Yeah. And I think obviously part of that was the US not qualifying. And I also like the time zone stuff, because 2014 was like the games are during prime time and you didn't want to go up against it. And MLS intelligently at the time was trying to use the momentum of the World Cup rather than swim against the tide. And I do remember the 2014 World Cup final was on ABC, and it was a doubleheader with a Portland-Seattle game. And it was a brutal game. It was like 1-0.
No, it was a Atlanta-Seattle game, if I remember correctly.
No, I thought it was
2018.
Atlanta. No, 2014 is what I'm talking
2014. Okay, I was talking 2018. Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
Interesting. I didn't realize they did it in 2018 too. I didn't remember that. But I remember that game.
Or maybe
and
that
it
was a
like
semifinal.
I just remember it being like, oh, this is the best game MLS has to put on. Great. And it just was like, you just got a bad one this time. And it's like the most MLS story. I tell this story all the time. We watched Orlando NYCFC's first ever game. I was in the MLS league office at the time doing work for MLSsoccer.com. And it was like Kaká, right? And they had sold out the Orange Bowl. And it was just 0-0 in like the 70th minute. And Simon Borg goes, just never snows for us. And I was like, what do you mean? And he's like, NHL, they do the Winter Classic. It just snowed the first time. And like no one remembers the game even, but it's this magical thing that now has this huge moment. And it was this surge of interest of like, they're playing hockey in the snow. And it was like MLS finally got a sold out full stadium with big stars and big names. And it was just a stinker of a 0-0 game. And that's always stuck with me. But yeah, this layoff is different. And I think we've already seen it with Columbus letting Rydstrom go. And with Austin, even more importantly, I think, letting Nico Estevez and Rodolfo Borrell go, it shows the sign internally, which is this is a second shot at a preseason. And teams that don't like where they're at, I think are going to use this in a way we've never seen before. I think it shows some other signs about the league, which we can talk about. But that's the big one is we legitimately have a chance to just start a new season coming out of this break if we want to.
And every team is playing at least half their games after the break.
More than half, yeah.
More than half. I mean, the Sounders are going to be playing 21 games after the break, which is wild. Or 21 MLS games.
I think most teams will have played 14 going into the break. So coming out of it, they will have, they will have the 20 even. Yeah, so they'll have the 20 or so left to play.
Yeah, I mean, it is an interesting, it creates an interesting dynamic. You know, one of the other ones that obviously near and dear to our heart is the Portland Timbers, who there's been a lot of chatter about how what's going on with Phil Neville, and every week he seems to do like he'll get a result that's just good enough to sort of no. The Gaffer's ready to go. What's his nickname? The
Gaffer. Yeah, I think so.
Well, yeah,
the Gaffs. Your British
exactly.
manager. Yeah, Portland on 14 points right now. So they're one ahead of St. Louis for 14th. Oh, yeah, the Fizzer, sorry. And 15th, obviously, Sporting Kansas City. Technically, they are 5 points out of a quote-unquote playoff spot. I wouldn't exactly call it that, but that's what some people will. I think he's in a lot of trouble. I watched the team and we got some comments from our show on Monday because we were live during the time when the news came out about Estevez. So we had already planned to talk about Henrik Rydstrom. But in the rundown, we had already built Tom kind of anticipated next week being that experience, which was hearing multiple coaches, sort of like that Red Monday, I think is what the NFL calls it, when the regular season ends. And that's where you get the news on a lot of it. And two of them happened already. The other major ones that people are talking about is Toronto, the struggles they've had. Obviously Philadelphia, which I would be surprised if Philadelphia made a move.
That seems like it would be tough, right? I mean, I know that this is exactly what happened, or not exactly what happened to him. It's similar to what happened to Carnell in St. Louis, but it just seems like it would be really harsh to, I realize going from Supporter Shield to Wooden Spoon contending is a pretty stark fall. But
Wooden Spoon contending at a rate that would be the worst points per game for punts in MLS history. Not just the worst team in the league. They'd be worse than 2013 DC United if it continued, which I'd be surprised if it did, just because, again, the core of a team is in there that's won so many games that my assumption is when they get hot, they'll win 3. And even though I'm not saying they'll make the playoffs, I think they'll blow that number, and
blows that number.
You have to be so bad all season to hit that. But that's, again, similar to the Phil Neville stuff, that shouldn't be a conversation, but the performances have been so bad that it pulls it in. My guess is with Ernst Tanner coming back, quote unquote, whether he left or not is up to a debate, or it seems like potentially opinion, that's just gives you a runway of it's all been chaotic. Let's reset from here. Let's start over. But Portland, and then we were going to talk at the time about Austin. And in saying that, it's okay, this is the feeling about Austin externally, and clearly it was happening internally. So I think it gives legitimacy to the conversations we're all having about all these teams, where if it feels like there's external pressure, There probably is, because an Austin felt it and they made the move, and a Columbus, not only did they feel it, they had a little bit of a different situation because they have Open Cup quarterfinals this week where they like wanted the new coach bump for that game. I think that Portland's in the same boat. I don't know how you don't watch Portland and feel that the pieces don't work together or are not working together. And so some of the pushback I got from Timbers fans, which I think is legitimate, is, well, do the pieces fit? Because if that's not the case, then is it on Phil Neville? It's on Ned Grabavoy. It's on the front office. And I think that's a fair question to ask.
It's a fair question to ask. I think this is what I would say. And I'm wondering how you fall on this, is that in the similar to the Burrell Estevez situation, where it's like, yeah, you're right, it's both, and because is there really someone was, I don't remember who it was, maybe it was Doyle, but they were comparing Neville to, Chris Reifer was comparing Neville to John Spencer, and John Spencer is the first Timbers coach. Everyone agreed was a disaster. He had, he was okay his first year, but he was like, he was famous for like rolling the balls out into the training pitch and say, "Have at it, boys." And anyway, everyone sort of agrees he was a disaster at Portland, and that's the most apt comparison at this point to Phil Neville. And yeah, I mean, I think there is something to be said that maybe the Timbers roster is not as well put together as some would have you believe. But like, does that is there really a world where Ned Grabavoy gets fired and Phil Neville doesn't?
And the way I just think people need to think about this stuff is, for the most part, it's the sporting director's job to fire the coach. So there's not a lot of sporting directors that walk in the room and say, "Oh, no, actually, I'm the problem. Fire me." So you need ownership to shift
my
into.
Bad, guys.
Exactly. Please just blame me, and that's it. So therefore, you end up in a situation where you need ownership to step in, unless there's a president who sits above both sides who would make this call, which is hit or miss in MLS if there is. And for the most part, the ones that are even worse because they think they know soccer when they don't. I think this is a big complaint.
You're talking about FC Cincinnati like that.
I was going to say there's a huge complaint in St. Louis that I've heard a lot about. And so the order of these things is, well, can we salvage it? So the coach goes first. If that doesn't work, then the sporting director goes first. Where it's fascinating is Austin, where both went at the same time.
I don't remember anything like that happening before. Do you? At least in the middle of the year. Like, I'm sure there's been years where they just cleaned shop and they said, we got to get rid of everybody. I guess you could even say that in some ways that's what happened in Kansas City.
Yeah, Vermees was both.
Right, yeah.
Which makes it a little bit tougher. No, I'm trying to think. Toronto had Bill Manning fired, and I don't remember if Robin was coach at the time or who was coach. They've also had a bunch of interims because of John Herdman and stuff like that. So I don't remember that situation. But no, you're right. It is fairly rare to have them both happen at the same time like this, where it's not like an off season or contracts were up and both were let go. But the like normal working assumption is the sporting director will hire the coaches. They'll hire the coaches for their system. And so if now for Austin, you have to do one process. After you do that process, they have to start the next process. So like, I'd be surprised if Austin hired a new coach this season who coached this year. I think best case scenario is you finally land on a name in the fall and maybe you announce them and they are going to take over after, or they start coming around, which I always think is hilarious. Of like, okay, so you're coaching the team, you just sit in the stands, watch them lose, and then you take over. Like, you're available. It's not like you strained a hamstring. You could coach. And that would be my guess of what happened. And I think because of that, Davey Arnault probably has a legitimate shot at keeping that job. But I think we will see 2 or 3 others. I think Portland is more talented than Austin, the players they've brought in. And I think you have to convince yourself that you can make it work. Now, I'm not 100% sure it will. But you have to, if you're like the ownership group, look at it and like, each guy is probably worth the value of what you paid for them. It was probably a mistake to pay that for all of them together. But you don't look at it and say, this guy's playing underneath his monetary value that we put out
These
there,
were clear
or is capable
mistakes.
of it.
Right.
Yeah. DaCosta's probably the biggest one just because that's the one they probably most overpaid for what he does. I think he's a good soccer player. I just think they put him in the Evander category themselves, which was a mistake.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. I guess. And so who are the other teams that you think are, flirting with coaching changes during this long break?
So I think the assumption is Portland's one of them. Austin, we thought would be one of them. They clearly won't be. I think there is a lot of external pressure around the LA Galaxy, which
they just give give him a contract extension.
They did just give him a contract extension. And I don't know exactly where that came from after the worst, not after, because they did it last year, but the worst season in MLS history. But Jim Curtin got a contract and he got let go. And so it wouldn't be the first time that it's ever happened. So I think Philadelphia is going to get talked about. Toronto, I think, will also get mentioned. And a reminder, Montreal and Orlando are on interim coaches right now. Columbus is on an interim coach. So when you look, here's just an example. Here's the non-playoff teams in the East. Orlando fired their coach. Toronto, we think's in trouble. Montreal fired their coach. Columbus fired their coach. And Atlanta and Philadelphia. So it's kind of everyone who's not a playoff team is in that territory in the Eastern Conference. In the West, I think it's a little bit less chaotic. And I think because you have San Diego and Colorado, the two teams outside who they either have new coaches or Varis who did well, where there's a ton of internal belief and they're not going to panic into a coach move right now.
Yeah. Well, turning our focus a little bit more to the West, the last time we talked, it felt like the West was sort of just, it was almost an embarrassment of riches at the top of the table where it felt like everyone had to win every game just to stay in the race. And in the interim, in the last 2 weeks especially, there's been a lot of that has been tested a lot. The Sounders only got 4 points in this 3-game week where they were all at home. And weirdly, the one they won was the one I thought was their toughest matchup. But then, LAFC suddenly is just absolutely falling apart. Vancouver has started to show some chinks. San Jose has started to show some chinks. I don't know if they're, all of a sudden the RSL continues to climb. Houston is the strangest team in the league right now for me. They have no ties. They have no ties. But they're not at the top of the conference, but just that it's gone MLS, I guess is what it's happened. Is that
it has,
they go ahead.
Oh, I would say so. The original base of our convo when we chatted last time was the West is stronger than the East.
Yeah,
that has not changed. I think my feeling is it's deeper than we even said. I think Dallas is a legitimate contender inside of that group that we talked about last time.
Sure.
I think LAFC will remain in that. There'll be questions about Mark Dos Santos. That's probably one of the ones I should have said as well. But that one I think is more external than internal, the pressure on him. But they went to a CONCACAF semifinal, the games that takes, the travel that takes, all of that. It's not unheard of. And those are the teams that probably are best off with this long layoff. Because now, rather than it be this full season thing where you never get your legs under you, like Seattle experienced in 21 and all of that, there's this reset where now you can come out of it. They also have some flexibility because Eustachio was on loan. So maybe they changed their team around. So what I would say is I think there are 6 teams legitimately in the Western Conference. And that's not even talking about San Diego, which I don't think they've done enough to deserve to. Where in the East, I would say there are 2. Right. So this experience over the last few weeks of teams knocking each other off, to me, has only increased my feeling that the West is strong. But it does not increase my feeling that any specific one of these teams has the best sort of lane to get there.
Sure.
Even San Jose, I think is the easiest one of they played all their guys. They've had injuries. They're struggling. They've struggled to get some of these guys on the field, but they've still put really good performances in against the other top teams. The loss in Seattle is not one where you hang your head and say, wow, we can't play with these guys. And that was without Nico Tsikiris and without Werner. And Preston Judd, being rotated throughout the week. And then they did the same thing with Vancouver.
Lineup. It was a totally rotated lineup.
Well, it's not rotated anymore because that's all they have left. Because then they went into the next game, but totally. And so Vancouver has missed Mueller this entire run, and they remain at the top of the conference. So I think it has increased my feeling that the West is back over the last 3 years. I think the West has been down in the East in terms of Cincinnati and NYCFC, Philly on top of Inter Miami, and sort of the class at the top of it have pushed things. Columbus, of course. Now it feels like that has transferred to the West. And I do think I wouldn't be surprised if any of the teams that we just talked about won the Supporters Shield or won MLS Cup.
Yeah, the one that's really surprised me recently is FC Dallas just seems to have suddenly gotten shown that they can really go toe to toe with some of the big boys. And this win over San Jose was particularly impressive because they sort of had to keep like San Jose kept coming back and they just kept pushing it farther. And then the goal, we got to talk about the Sam Sarver.
Great. Isn't it great?
It's amazing. I seriously want to ask Paul Rothrock what he thinks of Sam Sarver, because it's like, I feel like they have some kinship in their sort of the way they got here and sort of the way that they're carrying themselves. But that was just an amazing moment. And, for a guy to kind of come out of MLS Next Pro to start scoring some goals like he did, and then to just like embrace the moment. I love it. I just love that, the scuba dive celebration, whatever. I don't know if that was the best celebration, but to do it in front of the home supporters, and then to pick up a can that got through at you and to shotgun a beer. I mean, that was pure MLS. That was great.
It's personality that we just don't see from a lot of players. And one of the things I love about MLS, and I see this a lot because I cover NWSL, is a lot of these players who are not these anointed athletes from childhood have personality. They are socialized in a way that most pro athletes aren't, because pro athletes are just like raised on this track. And so you end up getting the Paul Rothrocks and the Andrew Thomases of the world. And Kosei Tafari at LAFC, he wants to be an actor. He wants to be a fashion designer. He speaks multiple languages. Like, you're not really getting that in MLB or NHL. Like, that's just not the lifestyle most of these people live.
There's an interview on Sky Sports or something with Cole Palmer where they're talking about it's like you talk about a guy who's just has no real life.
Yeah. And he's fun because he has no filter, because he doesn't really care, and he's not really paying attention. But like, listen, I'm not going to be the proponent only of college education is the only way things work. But what happens with most of these people is they just become socialized because they're older when they get to the pro ranks. They live a life where they're not this anointed God, and they have to operate in normal society. They have to learn to function for themselves to an extent. And this is something I know, talking to people, for example, in the Sounders Academy, when they do those loans to the Austrian mountains or Czech Republic, or even to USL championship teams, one of the comments I always get when I ask is, well, they got to learn how to cook dinner. Like, they have to grow up as human beings. It happens in soccer more than it happens in these other sports because it's not as high profile a sport here, and the money is not the same. So it's not this like lotto ticket that everyone is building their lives around. And Paul Rothrock and Sam Sarver, I think, are two examples of that. And you see it on the other end of like, they're quirky, they're fun, they're intelligent, they're thinking about stuff and open to talking about stuff. I've covered Sam Sarver since he was an academy kid. He was on Aiden Morris and Sebastian Berhalter's crew academy teams. And the comment has always been like, this kid plays like a madman. And it was just like, could you funnel him in the right direction to use all of the madman tendencies? And it wasn't right for him out of the academy. He went to Indiana, which is a great soccer program. He played high-level soccer for 3-4 years there. Then he goes to Next Pro, which I have a lot of bones about whether or not Next Pro is the right setup for everything in terms of what it is. But I think playing soccer is better than sitting on a bench and not having an opportunity to play soccer. I just would do it in the USL and have yourself going to Louisville and Charleston when you have those experiences, but no one asks me. And he sort of like bid his time and found a space, but he's a super interesting guy. I think it's one of those, obviously, now that he's this darling, people will learn about him more. He's talked a lot about mental health in the past. He had some tough times as a kid that I know the Crew Academy helped him through. And like he now has emerged in this really opportune spot. But this is the system that I think exists. And as much as people want to whine and complain, like, why do kids going to college? That's not the way it's done overseas, blah, blah, blah. You're always going to miss players, or players are always going to be, there are going to be some players who are ready later on. And that's why I'm happy that at least the net is bigger now, that a guy like that can then find his spot.
Well, and I think it's not just, I think probably to your point, it's not just going to college that's important. It's that they live lives outside of the athlete bubble. And, so many of these players in England, like they will, like, to use an example, right? They'll go on loan. They'll come through an academy, and then sure, maybe they go on loan to Wrexham, or they go on loan to some, random club, and they're just, but they're still kind of tied to the big club. They still are raised in an environment that is about where soccer players are gods, where they don't have to interact with normal people, where like all their friends are, fellow academy players, where there's someone doing their laundry and doing all this kind of stuff. And then the American system is just set up in a way that, for the most part, kids are forced to go out and go to school and, go to, whether it's high school or whatever, but they have lives outside of their teams a lot of times. And especially once they get, if they don't go pro right away, they're living normal. They're like normal people. And I think that's what's so refreshing about the American soccer player for the most part, is that these guys want to, they want to have conversations with you. Like, I don't know, every single time I run into Paul Rothrock and he asks me, how are you doing? And it's not like a empty gesture of like, it's like, no, seriously, like, how are your kids or whatever. And it's like, that's just not something you're used to athletes doing.
And I think the other thing that I like is I do think it creates an environment where guys that come to MLS start to learn it here, where, you talk to foreign players who have always been in a different style, and they come here and maybe they're uncomfortable at first, but like I chatted with Steven Moreira at preseason, and he's like open to sitting down and talking about his life and his experience. And he's telling me about the fights he had with Wilfred Nancy and the experiences he goes through there, and what it's going to be like when Darlington Nagbe retires, because he's the heart and soul. And, as a player coming here, like Nagbe adopted him and he goes with his family, all these conversations that, to what I understand from a lot of these guys, they just wouldn't have in other places. Yeah. And I think some of that tone is set by, you come into a locker room where someone else is acting that way with media. And so it sort of builds a trust and a relationship and a style that you wouldn't really have. And I think it's obviously been massively influential on the women's game, of the push for equal pay was from players who were high achievers, who had been through an experience of playing at UNC and Princeton and Stanford, whatever, that the average athlete doesn't have. And it's not that those places are perfect, but they are forced to be intellectually challenged sometimes when they're in those places. They also rub shoulders with other people outside of their bubbles. So then as you grow up into your professional career, your friends are in other fields and you're learning about those fields and you're watching them succeed, where a lot of players, if you are AAU basketball, you would never really get out of that. And, if you play for Chelsea's academy at U12, probably most of the people are just soccer players, and that's sort of the niche you're in. So yeah, I think it's really interesting. Sam Sarver's a great story. He's a really cool personality. It's fun that he's just wearing it on his sleeve, and he's done, for much as I think most people will say, oh wow, like this is just a kid who doesn't know better. He's actually done a lot behind the scenes to like make himself comfortable to be able to be this. And I think it's part of why he's playing really well.
Well, and I think the tell was a little bit it wasn't like it was all just in the moment. The next day he went and did an Instagram post with a bunch of six
packs. Gotta get that Modelo money, baby. Yeah, that was
gold.
Yeah, it's so good. And Dallas is pretty good about they're kind of like, yeah, well, let's take a shot. Let's see what happens. Yeah. Where other teams might shut it down. And so to your point on the soccer side, I've always been really high on this Dallas team. Petar Musa, I think he might start a game for Croatia at the World Cup, which is wild to say. And this is not Thomas Mueller coming here and working his way back into the team. Like, this is a guy who is peeking into the national team because of his play in Major League Soccer. I think he is the best complete forward in the league. And so that's a reference point that the rest of it all operates off of. And they've found a little more possession this year, not as much as I'd like. I think they've struck out in trying to help him. Santi Moreno is better than nothing, but is not the proper DP10 that they should bring in because of how good this team can be. But most of the other pieces fit. And what I was talking about on my show on Soccerwise, that when you watch the San Jose game, when they see a half opening, because they defend deep and they find their triggers and they go and they press, it's a full 11 guys like dogs then in the other way. And so when they win the ball and they go in transition, it's not 1 or 2, it's 5 to 7, and they overwhelm you. And all of them are finishers and really good in those moments. And so I think that commitment to that style, plus the individual talent in a lot of the pieces that are in there. Uragide is one of the best center backs in the league. Coloddi's been a bit of a step down this year for him. So goalkeeper's been a problem. Sirois got the start in the last game, who I think is a solid MLS keeper. And then up the spine, like, that's something that this is a team that will have a shot in any elimination game they play. And if they can either improve the quality on the roster or just turn the screws to perfect what they do, they also have a shot to stay in a Shield race.
You know, and you had me thinking, Petar Musa has to be, like, this is admittedly a niche first, but he's got to be one of the first, if not the first, MLS player who came to MLS before he was really in the national team, got into the national team, and it's not just but like, to be with Croatia, like, that's a pretty high level. Like, we've seen players go from not being in the national team to being in a World Cup, but not necessarily like a team of Croatia's stature. And I guess you could argue Almada, is that right? The Argentine, right?
Yeah, Thiago Almada. Yeah,
Thiago Almada. Like, but he wasn't really like an important player for Argentina, whereas Petar Musa could end up being like a real player for Croatia.
Yeah, I think Almada is obviously a huge one. I'm trying to think of other ones, and I think I could say names or countries, but like, there's been players who have done it with Poland, a couple. There have been players who have done it with like a Cameroon, a Nigeria. So like, probably that level of team. I mean, it's hard for me to remember, but like, Croatia have been to back-to-back World Cup semifinals.
I know.
And a final and one. So they are a blue blood team, but that's a bit of an outlier. Like, they don't have the player pool of a blue blood like France, whatever.
Right, yeah.
But yes, what you are saying is true, which is there are few, if any, examples of a player in his profile. I mean, Cucho can't even get back into Colombia, and he went to La Liga. He qualified for Champions League, and now his club resume currently is better than all the other guys who they won't let him jump because when he was in MLS, they said it wasn't a good enough league. So that's one example. And then on the other side, Musa might start alongside Luka Modric in a World Cup game. And he's been incredible. I mean, the big question will be if he stays. If a guy like that goes and performs the way he's capable of performing, I don't know that Dallas can say no to the potential numbers that come in. They bought him for around 10 million. So like, it has to be a real offer. It can't just be a like, oh, we never heard of this guy. Yeah, we'll grab him. But anything 25 or up, which you're the starting forward for Croatia, if you score goals, like, we are talking about Hoffenheim and Leverkusen and Gladbach and Roma and you know, Atalanta. Like, that's where that guy normally plays. That will be the huge question for Dallas. And I've normally been frustrated as a neutral with the decisions Dallas makes in those moments, which is, oh yeah, we'll take the money. Because they don't normally double down and say, no, we're going to win now. And then we promise, like part of their ethos is selling great. There is a way to do it, to say, all right, let's do 5 months here, 4 months. Let's win a trophy. Then you're gone in January, and we totally respect it. Dallas normally just takes the money.
Yeah, I don't know that I can remember a time when they, you know, especially for a team that has had so few cup finals. I think they have They won U.S. Open Cup in like 98,
16
90.
or 17.
Well, they won the Supporter Shield. Oh, you're right. Did
No,
they
won
win
the cup with
You're right.
Pareja
You're right.
and
They haven't
Mauro
won an
Diaz.
MLS Cup, I guess, is what I'm thinking of.
Yeah,
but
they've been to one in 2010.
Right. But anyone else that you really think is that either is going to be moving within MLS or out of MLS based on, or maybe not based on, but like this summer window, like who are some players that you think could be sort of in the shop?
The young guys are the obvious ones to start with. Like a Gozo is an obvious one. Whether he goes to the World Cup or not, his numbers and his profile, like for a guy that size with that speed and that touch, like he can play anywhere. So guys like that, I think, are going to there is now a clear path to big clubs that want to come in and grab these players. And for them, buying between 5 and 10 million is getting in before it gets hot, right? That's the like Gaga Slonina, Caleb Wiley's, like all of these guys. So my assumption is the number RSL has, they probably will get that offer this summer, even if he doesn't make the World Cup, because that's the profile that he sits in. And that's where guys like that are viewed. Julian Hall will be one of those as well. There's no question that offers will come in for him. One of the fascinating teams to watch is Wilfred Zaha's on loan. His loan ends this summer. I'd be surprised if he comes back, but also Charlotte's gone big game hunting. And Charlotte feels like one of the teams that if they go to their owner with a guy who was a flashy World Cup player, that there is like a selling point there. I think there's like 5 to 10 MLS teams that will probably try and buy someone out of this World Cup, whether that's purely for that reason or if it's, well, they came here, they liked it here, we got a chance to meet their agent, now we can we convince them to stay? Or now that the World Cup's over, that player's ambitions at the national team level are shifted, can we get a shot to bring them in? So I think there are some obvious clubs. And then the other one is Chicago. We think Robert Lewandowski's in talks with them. He would have to take a huge pay gap from Saudi Arabia, where he is getting offers to go there. It is the biggest Polish community outside of Poland, and he is a legend. Hugo Kuipers is one of the 4 or 5 best center forwards in this league. So either they have to fit together, and in that scenario, maybe Jonathan Bamba's available or has to be moved. If not, Kuipers might be on the move. And I think there are some smart MLS teams that are going to be hunting for these in the summer. I think they're looking at other teams' DPs first before they're going overseas to say, can we get a little bit of a known quantity and get someone in the door and sort of be a dumping grounds? I wouldn't be surprised if a St. Louis is one of those. I wouldn't be surprised if a Colorado is one of those. I think there's a couple of these teams that can read the tea leaves well enough to say our best deal might be inside of MLS.
Do you think a Dejan Joveljic could be on the move? I would just think because he wasn't signed by the current GM. He's a DP, but he's also got some value.
You talk to him, he is such a unique human being. He loves scoring goals. And it's like the only thing that is in his life is scoring goals. So if he gets the chance to do it, no matter how bad the team is, I think for him, he doesn't care. I think he very much like connects to the idea that Kansas City believed in him. And if you're a front office, the guy does the thing he does well, even if, let's say 5 years from now, David Lee has a plan for the way he wants his team to play and Joveljic doesn't fit into that. Congratulations. You're 5 years away from that. And I don't think giving away a guy who will finish any chance that a team can barely create would be one that would move. So I think there's like logic in that thought process of like, what are the struggling teams? What are the assets that they can get rid of to start to recoup? Mirto Izuni's probably on the move just because I don't know how Austin fits it all together. And if I'm Austin, I'd stick with Torres and I'd stick with Brandon Vasquez. And I just don't see an MLS team thinking that that's worth their investment or their money.
Well, it's going to be a fascinating summer, that's for sure. We got one more week before that, but it's going to be a season unlike any other. And then of course we'll have another season unlike any other next year when they play 17 games that they're playing?
Yeah, the sprint season.
Oh, that's going to be That's going to
You're
be
all
something.
secretly hoping we just do sprint seasons forever after this, and it's a Legia and there's a Apertura Clausura.
It does make sense, doesn't it?
I'm voting for it.
Yeah. I mean, there's a lot of fun ways that you could structure it, I think, and it would be super interesting. But no one's asking me for my opinions, I guess. Although maybe I'll share them. All right. Well, this, as I kind of alluded to, this has been part of a partnership that Sounder at Heart is getting into with Soccerwise and Kickback Soccer. And I wanted to give you guys a little bit more of a chance to talk about what's going on at Soccerwise, what's going back at, you guys have, 48 previews or 48 features on every team in the World Cup on Kickback? Is that right? No, on...
Yeah, we have our first touch
kick.
Feed.
First touch.
Yes,
thank you.
First touch. We're close. We're going to get there eventually.
Yeah, I know.
Our first touch feed. So we have a bio episode about the history of soccer in the country, some fun facts, sort of stories about cult legends or the way the game was built. There are some interviews in there with people, whether it's journalists or current players or former players, or just fans and people from those countries. We kind of have a good mix of all of it. So we did one for all 48 countries. So if you are just trying to find some stuff, we've got music from each of those countries in the backgrounds. We've got some goal calls, all that type of stuff. Search First Touch, which is our World Cup feed. We are currently doing 2 shows a week that we are adding to those, which are more timely. One is a news show as we head into the World Cup. The other one is more of these like evergreen stories that we're exploring. This week is a story about what it feels like to be left off a World Cup roster and that experience. But we've done a number of stories there. Last week, we did a deep dive into James Rodriguez and what he means to Colombia and the history of the national team, and all of that. Some others have been more specific on topics. We dug into some weird history moments that I was unaware of before. So it's been really fun. And then we will be doing a daily World Cup show once the World Cup starts on June 10th. And that will be available on that feed, Soccerwise, all of our others. And it will be live every day, 9:30 a.m. Eastern time, on our YouTube pages, as well as streaming in a bunch of other places. So we're going to have a lot of the coverage here. We were talking before this started of for the World Cup, obviously for us, we're going to cover it from a global stage and the big moments and the big games and all of that. It's not MLS specific, but one of the things that will be fun is there are these guys who pop up, and for us, they're known entities. And for everyone else, it's going to be like, no one had ever heard of this guy. And, I was just getting ready, doing some notes and putting like Eloy Room for Curacao in a depth chart as a starting keeper of like, he's going to have a game and everyone's going to be like, whoever knew? And it's like, oh, let me give you the 5-year history on Eloy Room. Or Derek Etienne probably will score a huge goal for Haiti at some point in this tournament. And because of the 48 teams, there's a lot of those. So I'm super excited for those. As terrible as a lot of this World Cup feels, I'm starting to get a little bit of excitement of like, there's going to be super important, fun games that we all watch together. And I think that's what a World Cup is about. And I think at some point that part will come, and we'll continue to talk about all the other stuff as well. But that's the part that I think we're most looking forward to. And it feels like we've finally gotten a little bit closer on some of that.
Yeah, no, I would totally agree. Like, I think there's a lot of valid complaints and criticisms of the World Cup and FIFA heading into this whole phase. But the reality is that once the games are coming, once the games are here, and we're talking about it, I think it's going to be, it's going to be soccer. It's going to be the most interesting, the most fun soccer event, sporting event in the world. Yeah. And at some point that will take over. That doesn't diminish all this other stuff that's going on, but it does sort of, it's a reality. Yeah. And I think I am still looking forward to the World Cup being in Seattle. It's maybe not quite what I thought it was going to be, but we'll have some fun here. As people may know, we're hosting a watch party for the U.S. Australia game with Scuffed, which is a U.S. national team podcast. So people will be able to come out to that. And we'll be doing stuff in the at our new recording studio a ton. So hopefully we get to meet some of y'all. And thank you for doing this, David. And we'll continue. I assume we're going to keep doing this.
Yep. Yeah. So we're going to keep talking. If anyone's looking for some USMNT coverage, we have that. We've got Matt Doyle on. with us every week. We'll be doing game previews, game reviews, and we'll keep talking MLS and NWSL because it's obviously the core of, I think, for a lot of us, how we became fans, and it's our connection point. So that stuff never goes away.
All right. Well, David, thank you so much for doing this. Once again, that's Soccerwise and Kickback Soccer and First Touch. Those are all the.
Yeah,
I think we nailed them. Those are the ones, right? All right, good. We got it. All right. With all that said, I'm Jeremiah Oshan. Let's get out of here. You're listening to Nos Audietas on the Sounder at Heart Podcast Network, and we will catch you next time.
Let's go Sounders.